Hello, welcome back to What Now on the threshold of life, death, and grief. And I'm here with my friends and colleagues.
David Kennedy.
And Red Keating.
I'm Julie Brown. And here today we get to be in conversation and welcome today our guest, Vera Decena. Welcome, Vera.
Hello, hello. Nice to be here.
Vera, I'm going to read your bio that you sent me, and then we're going to jump into some conversation. So Vera is the founder of Colorful Nutrition. She is a grief-informed nutrition counselor and a health and wellness coach. With over a decade in food, nutrition, and health sciences, she created Colorful Nutrition after her own spousal loss, where she noticed a gap in grief care, which had plenty of emotional support, but little guidance for the physical body in mourning. Presently, Vera supports the bereaved with compassionate, whole body care, helping people nourish, regulate, and rebuild gentle routines. She normalizes the body's response to grief and highlights the mind-body connection so people can feel more grounded in themselves. Above all, she approaches this work with humility, continually humbled by the resilience people bring as they learn to live alongside loss. Isn't that so true, guys? Like I read that. And when people ask me, how can you do all of this grief work? I say often it's because I'm in awe of the resilience of what I see people carry and work through. So I really resonate with that, Vera.
Yeah, it's true.
To get us started, you mentioned in your bio that your work was informed by your own spousal loss. Vera, can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you come to be doing this very body kind of focus, understanding how grief impacts us physically work?
Sure. I'll rewind a little bit just to add into how really like the health part, the food part, made it very obvious what happens after grief. So I've been in nutrition for quite some time, really trying to lead into a career for food security initiatives and whatnot. So like food banks and whatnot. So I was in school, volunteering, doing work in that space. And then I was one semester rather, into graduating. But unfortunately, during that time, that's when my partner of 8 years passed away. This is definitely something that I was, of course, my world just completely shattered. I didn't know what was going on physically, emotionally, because this was also my first time really knowing grief for the first time. So it was my introductory moments with grief, and it had to be with the closest person in my life. And so I was quite astonished, actually, while I was in school, that there was no talk of mental health and how that affects our nutrition, our health, our physical body, and whatnot. So it was just such a big missing component, also in my education and also in just my understanding of who I am. This is how you live through your day-to-days in your physical body. And so when I lost Leo, my late partner, I just, going through the emotional toll was one thing, going through grief and the existential thought was another, but also not being in a body that was unrecognizable. I was just in the state of shock. So shock was a new sensation that I've never felt. Numbness. I've never had panic attacks before. The anxiety and the depression all coming in at once in just like a single swoop of a moment. I mean, of course, during that time, it was hurtful. It was so painful. But I was also amazed at how much the body also is trying to protect us from the emotional distraught. I don't know if it's the medical system itself that's really focused on what happens to the physical body, like what you see if you see a scratch or there's the chronic diseases that we see. But the emotional pain is also something that's also not really talked about enough and what the body does to endure. So when I was during my grief, of course, I was going through the waves of just sleep disruption, eating disruption as well. All of the fun stuff that comes along with grief, I was feeling. But then that's what made me decide on just looking into it some more. And it was very tough also, just even trying to read all of the grief emotions and whatnot. There's also podcasts that helped me as well, books and whatnot, but it didn't speak too much on the physical body, which is very hard because I hear time and time again, like, what's going on? Like, why am I feeling this way? Am I grieving properly? These are conversations that I actually have lots with also other grievers. And so this was just like the forefront. So I'm like, maybe I'm just grieving wrong, or maybe maybe my body is not supposed to feel this way. Or it was either that I was not paying attention also to maybe I just didn't want to feel this way because I wanted so badly to go back to what it used to be like. What it used to be like when, that normalcy that I felt before. Like I kind of wanted to go back to how it was before. And my body would not have that at all. It was actually interesting to witness. And I think maybe it was nice having that health background and then losing my partner unexpectedly because there was such a contrast between who I was before when I was, living in a regulated nervous system, baseline was good, up until the point where I lost Leo, and then just things completely shattered. My body was completely unrecognizable. But yeah, so that's kind of like how that story kind of came to be, and just wanting more grief support, more physical body grief support is kind of where I'm getting myself into. So there's still lots to learn,
Yeah.
still lots to learn.
Yeah. It is, just listening to you, Vera, I mean, all of us have heard over and over about the physical issues of grief. And you're right, the medical world has not really addressed it other than to try to pharmaceutically deal with the body issues. And I think what we all know is that grief is very much felt in our physical bodies, and yet there's not been a lot of help. So this is wonderful to have this conversation with you.
And I want to just echo that when you say in a body that was unrecognizable, there's something about that sentence for me. I thought, yes, of course. So on top of everything else you've lost, in all the ways your world has become unpredictable and destabilized, I also don't recognize this body. And I just haven't heard it put like that before. And it's really a powerful line for me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I also have to give it a shout out to my favorite. I know everybody has like some sort of celebrity idol or a musician idol, but my idol is Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor. So shout out to to her, because I felt like I did not recognize who I was in a physical form because I didn't get any information or resources. I was like, okay, maybe I'm just the only one who's feeling this way. I'm the odd one out, I'm the outlier and whatnot. And maybe I'm like, maybe this is what I get for getting too involved in health before, because now I'm just so hyper aware. And, maybe I'm just, not supposed to feel this way and whatnot. But if it weren't for her book, The Grieving Body, that came out earlier last year, I was like, okay, yes. So I'm not the only one who's feeling this way. I'm not the only one who is going through these abrupt changes of hypervigilance and anxiety, and where you're just in an activated form where, I lost Leo quite young too. So I just felt like the world was just so much more scarier. And my body was, physically trying to protect myself from what it believes is a threat. Losing my partner, which is my attachment, my safety, my bond. So, I've learned so much through just even reading her book alone and understanding like, okay, this is such a physical sensation. I've mentioned like grief is not just a standalone emotion. It's a whole body sensation. It's a whole body feeling. And just having to go back to a place of normalcy, whatever that may look like, takes so much time too.
And just a reminder to our listeners, as you're talking about Mary Frances O'Connor's work, we've had the honor of interviewing her twice for this podcast, both with her book, The Grieving Brain and The Grieving Body. And so much of what you're going to talk about today and what you're mentioning, I just want to let our listeners know, if you go back through our previous seasons, we do have those episodes available too.
Yeah.
And Vera, I'm just wondering, you made the comment about a regulated nervous system, before your grief journey, and I'm assuming that means then the grief journey, maybe there's a sense that there's a dysregulated nervous system going on. I'm wondering if you could give us some context for people that are listening, what that means, and then how grief plays, or how grief sort of plays in activating those systems.
For sure. Yeah. So before loss, you have that sense of normalcy. Safety is involved. Not too sure if people know what the window of tolerance is, but you're able to withstand any sort of stressors that come your way. I like to call it as rebounding back to baseline, where basically, if something happens, we're able to get to ourselves in a regulated form quite quickly. So rebounding back to baseline is what I usually say. But after grief, when you lose, especially such a big attachment, everything's up in the air. There's so much worry, and there's so much unknown, unpredictability. And I think the body wants stability, wants predictability. It wants to feel safe. And mind you, after I lost Leo, I also had to do a multitude of different things, also being a young widow. Again, existential thoughts is one big thing, learning about death and what does life mean after death, which I don't know if the brain really likes that conversation, because it's quite...
The brain really struggles with that.
Yeah, well, you can't get an answer to that, which is, I think the brain really prefers closed loops, closed conversations. That's why closure is such a big thing. But when you lose somebody, especially your sense of safety, your bond, this is like attachment where you have your day to day that's, part ingrained in you as a body system. We're able to know that this person's going to come home and have dinner with us, if we have issues going through the day, again, like, regular stressors, we're able to be seen, heard, witnessed by our loved ones. But losing somebody, again, for me at least, I'll speak for myself. When I lost Leo, I was already in the middle of school, just about to finish school. But because I was in school, I wasn't able to work. So thinking about career, thinking about, oh my goodness, what do I do? I'm working, or I'm in school right now. I can't afford this apartment that we were living in. So trying to figure out where to live, trying to figure out my dog, trying to figure out funeral arrangements, his estate, his family, so many things that I was just not prepared for, just made, all of the things that I was like having issues, problems at school and whatnot, and like things to navigate before that no longer was a problem. Now the forefront was, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's happening? Who am I now? Where did they go? And all of this stressors, all of these like massive thoughts that's just like, can't even walk down the streets without like being in fear, being in anxiety, because there's just so many questions that need to be answered. Again, it's we want that closed loop. We want to feel like we're safe, but losing somebody that, you love, and then you're displaced and trying to figure all of that, all of just life was very difficult. So it takes time just to get to a place of first solving those problems, then eventually getting to a place where you can find that regulated state. But mind you, your body is going haywire at that point. So just understanding even that was just another big leap into the grief space of trying to understand.
So your background in nutrition and your study and your focus on nutrition and then experiencing this in your body and this incredible upheaval and unregulated piece. So talk to us about what part does nutrition play? Because we again, in our counseling, we hear a lot of clients say either, I don't want to eat, I'm not eating, or I'm eating too much, or so what is going on with nutritionally, and what does grief do to upset that?
Oh, yes, that's such a great question. I love it's interesting how it affects just our digestion, what grief does, or just any major stressor, life stressor. It's really interesting how just being in an activated or alerted state really disrupts our eating patterns. And I'm sure other people can relate to this. Like if if there's a big meeting that you need to prepare for, sometimes people don't eat because they're just so nervous. So it's kind of in the same realm as that. Although I think for grief with that amount of shock, at least personally for me, and I'm sure I think this is similar across the board. I didn't eat for weeks because of the shock and the numbness. Food, for some reason, just did not have any taste to it. So that was very interesting. I had no appetite. When I did eat, it was very difficult to hold all of that down. So I don't know if that was also the body trying to protect itself, because it's like, no, we have to figure out this emotional stress. We do not need to eat because that's not, we can't divert that energy into digestion. We need to focus on survival. What's going on here? What's going on? So I think because of that, my eating patterns were completely disrupted to the point where I lost so much weight. I think in a week's time, I lost about 10 pounds, which, in nutrition, a healthy gain or loss of weight is about 1 to 2 pounds per week. So 10 pounds in one, people were just shocked that they're shocked. I'm shocked that that was the result of grief. It's just I have no appetite. Food just tasted so bland. So there's also that, but also when there's heightened anxiety, it's almost as if and this is not during like the intense phases of early grief. Now this is like during just the grief process. When there's anxiety and whatnot, it disrupts, it depends on the individual, because usually what the body wants is it cuts off digestion because it's no longer a needed use of energy. And the body's wonderful in terms of just making sure that we have enough energy system. And so what I see is if people are eating a lot, it's usually as a coping mechanism.
Like soothing,
yes, exactly.
comforting. Yeah,
exactly. I was just going to say comfort food. So when people say it's comfort foods, it's usually because it's just a means to like regulate themselves. They find comfort, exactly what you've mentioned. I think when the body does want food, we're not usually choosing nutrient dense. It's usually energy dense. So fast foods are usually the choice: saturated fats, high sugars, high salt. So that's usually where people would choose, or what people would eat typically, just because, again, it's comforting. And then it's interesting too when it comes to like convenience foods as well. I think with food marketing, I think this is also, I'm definitely a nerd when it comes to food. They had it right, because McDonald's has this they have this business plan, or this business model where they want familiarity. Like, what you're going to get every time you eat at McDonald's.
It's very consistent.
Yeah, very consistent. And that's
I can go to any McDonald's in any city, in any country, and a Big Mac is going to taste like a Big Mac.
Exactly. And so that's a great selling point. But also that's in terms of, I don't want to use the word biohacking, but when it comes to like the psychology of how we eat and whatnot, we want familiarity. And that's why we tend to want to go into foods that we know are going to feel safe, and we're going to feel satiated and going to taste great, and we're going to be full for however long. But it's not usually nutrient dense that I find most people do tend to, because I think also when we're in activated forms, we just want quick energy. Which is not usually the typical nutrient dense foods that you see. So I find that very fascinating while I was doing research, why we gravitate towards energy dense meals when we're in a stressful state, or we're just not eating at all. So it's either or. I find that is usually the case for most people who are going through stressful events.
And so, Vera, what do you recommend to your clients about that? Because, this comes up a lot in my sessions. And initially, I kind of tell people not to worry about it. Like, if we can just whatever you can get into the body and you can tolerate, we're not, we don't have to worry that we didn't get our fruits and veggies in this week or next week, because, when the body is in that survival mode and the world feels shattered to us, we're just trying to keep the body functioning at all. And I often kind of say initially, I don't think that's the priority, other than making sure there's something coming in. Right. But of course, I think what you're talking about, but please correct me, is long-term. what are the small ways, even the small, because I think, we need this to be manageable, because when we're grieving, there's so many tasks, there's so many things asked of us in our energy, is that we're probably not going to feel like preparing, very nutrient rich meals, or we might not even be attracted to that, as you were saying. So what do you recommend for clients around just to start to nourish themselves in a way that supports themselves through this very energetically dense time?
Yeah, for sure. Basically, what you've mentioned was, great advice is to be able to eat, small meals as much as possible. Try to lead into nutrient dense meals. But I also have to say, during times when you're in extreme distress, it's very difficult. So just even honoring that as well. I also want to add this. I know this might not be like completely answering your question, which I will definitely get to later on, but mealtime food is such a social part of who we are. Of course, that's where we get our energies and our nutrients, but also leaning into the social aspect of that too. I think when we're eating, especially during like distressing times, eating with others, I think that helps us also self-regulate. When it comes to like the nervous system regulation, there's the activated state, which is the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, but there's the calm state, which is called rest and digest. There's a reason why it's called rest and digest, is when we feel in a regulated spot, we're able to digest efficiently. And I think when we're with loved ones, it really does help with the digestion. People can help us with taking care of ourselves by feeding us. Maybe they could look out for us, making sure that we're actually eating enough and whatnot. Maybe, my experience with losing the weight, maybe it would have been helpful if my friends were with me while we were eating. And mind you, my friends did come and help and brought food. And I remember eating for the first time, and feeling like, wow, this is amazing. Like, I don't remember food tasting this great, but it's because I'm with my friends that made such a big difference, because I felt so safe and calm to be able to enjoy a nourishing meal and not have to worry about grief for just a sec, but to actually just to feel safe, even for just a moment. I think that makes such a big difference. So, I love the whole nutrition part, of course, which is, trying to get into like what vitamins and what minerals, which I think is an incomplete picture, because there's so much, and this is why I love food. There's so much more to food, and it's not just the nutrients, it's just the emotionality part to it as well. And I'm sure we see this also, especially with like widows, when we eat together as one. I think it's really important to find spaces to be able to be able to eat with one another. And I know hospice groups do that. They have the cooking sessions and whatnot, where they cook together and they eat together. I think makes such a big difference in doing that in community. But of course, if you're on your own, for sure, try as much as possible to eat anything that's high in protein. Because those are the building blocks of what the body needs. Aside from just energy, it just needs to rebuild itself. And I think that's a really important part. As we're going through grief with the high anxiety and depression and whatnot, we're going through such an energy and extensive moment that it's in stress. And with stress, there's of course byproducts like inflammation and whatnot. So just making sure that there's protein in there as much as possible, nutrients and whatnot. And if you do have to lead into the energy dense products, that's completely fine. I think just eating, I think, is the most important part, and hydrating, of course, and just making sure that, sleep and, all of the items that ensures that we have enough energy to be able to, withstand the hardships of grief, which is, of course, quite energy intensive.
As you're talking there, I feel like I'm listening to this through, and I'm glad you sort of said the fight, flight, and freeze and fawn, through that sense that grief and experiencing the death of a loved one puts us in a place where we don't feel safe anymore, a place where it's almost like the body responds to that as danger.
Yep.
And when our body goes into that state, a lot of the things that you've been talking about get activated, right? And I'm glad you mentioned sleep there at the end too, because I'm sure we hear a lot about people unable, their sleep pattern gets disrupted. And listening to it through that lens helps me understand, like, yeah, when I'm stressed or if I feel like I'm under threat, eating is not the thing that's first on my mind. And in fact, digestion kind of slows down and stops becoming sort of a vital function because you don't need to, you don't need to eat a hamburger if you're running away from something that is threatening your life. And listening to you through that frame, it makes a whole lot of sense that then grief is completely experienced through the body. And then that context helps us understand why sleep or identity, or nutrition and our energy levels are so affected.
Yes.
And it's not anything the person has done to do wrong or right. It is a natural reaction of our bodies to a perceived threat. Right?
Yes. Thank you so much for saying that, Red. Yeah, that's absolutely spot on, which I'm trying to normalize that the body knows exactly what it needs to do, which I think I just find it so fascinating that it's doing whatever it needs to do to protect us. And as you've mentioned, you said perceived threat, which I think is so fascinating too, just to say perceived, because I don't recommend this, but if you ever have time to look into Health Canada stats, but they have changed perceived health or perceived threat, or, they use the word perceived. So that's very interesting that there's no physical threat, but the body feels like there is a threat. So it makes me also realize that just the bond itself, or the attachment that we have with our loved ones, is just ingrained in who we are. And that if they are gone, that is a threat to us, and our body is responding to that, which I think normalizing that the body just knows best, and then how to of course take care of the body as it's grieving. So that's why I love Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor's book, The Grieving Body, because it is in grief. The body is in grief. Beautiful stuff.
The other thing we talk about a lot is that grief is very social, which is related to the body in the sense that our social connections and relationships are disrupted. So I think of, when you talk about eating, in where there's a couple and they may be older, and one of the spouse dies, particularly if it, and I don't mean this to be a statement of fact, but often if it's the male that is left who has not been involved in nutrition or in cooking or meal preparations, there's and then eating alone. And I loved what you pointed out, and that's one that we don't think about in terms of socially, actually not just taking people food and dropping it, but bringing food and saying, can we eat together, could be a very, very important piece, because I know, and we all know that what happens is people don't eat because who wants to cook a meal for one, first of all? And then I don't even know what I want to eat. And if it's just me, I end up with all these leftovers and I just don't know what to do with food because I'm not eating much. And then of course you extend that to maybe you have a single mom or dad whose partner dies and they've got kids who need an ongoing balanced nutrition, but the person doesn't feel like providing that just because of the social aspects of what grief does, the isolation often of grief. So I appreciate that, but I also recognize how hard it is for single people to deal with cooking and eating nutrition, especially nutritiously, in a time when it's a struggle just to even eat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not the easiest for sure. I've experienced that myself, where sometimes I'm lucky to have a meal. Sometimes I just don't. Just exactly like what you said. I don't feel like making a meal. You don't have the energy to do it because all of that is spent on just going through the day. The last thing you want to think about is a meal. So I definitely feel for those who are going through that and trying to find time to just even cook for themselves and their families, is definitely adds to the hardships of what grief is asking for a person. I just really hope that understanding, trying to create programs and just understanding what happens to a person's day to day. It's not just the emotional part of it. It's of course trying to go through through the day to day that I think people just kind of maybe don't recognize. Instead of asking, or alongside of asking, how are you feeling? It's what have you eaten lately? What have you been eating? I think these are great ways to just ensure, like, hey, are you eating enough to get through the grief itself? Yes, you have to, of course, process the grief, but do you have enough nutrients and energy and whatnot to withstand that? Withstand the day to day, withstand the processing. Like, persons going through grief is taking a lot out of them for sure. And I think this is where maybe pushing the grief literacy and whatnot is definitely something that I'm really passionate about. And that's why I think maybe even adding can we eat with you? Can I make a meal with you? My goodness, that would, like, if that, I loved it when that happened for me. It was just those moments. And to be quite honest, when somebody cooks for me or when somebody comes and shares a meal with me, they don't have to talk about the grief itself. Just having somebody there with me and just sharing a meal and just feeling normal again. It's such a blessing. It's such a blessing. And I think that's just like the small little, glimmers that people can offer for each other. And, food is food brings us together. That's why, again, I've mentioned, I love food and just not the nutrient part only. Of course, it's an important part, but it's what brought us together as a society, humanity and whatnot. So I wouldn't imagine that that's also what connects us also through such a painful period as well. So, yeah.
And what I'm also hearing is that we work with some acceptance of where our body's at in grief, right? Is that if we're not hungry or we're only eating this or that, or our energy is really low and we're not sleeping, like I often hear people kind of feeling like I got to get back to normal as baseline, as you said. And it's like, yeah, your baseline, that's not coming. That's not coming anytime soon. And that's, as you say, like, this is your body. Your body is actually working really, really hard to support you right now. But I often see just people pushing and going, well, like, the least I could do would be to be eating better or going for walks every day. I'm thinking of this woman I was working with a while ago, and we were talking about, how she was supporting herself. And she said, well, I got to just get back to the gym. And I looked at her and I said, is that reasonable? And she laughed and she said, no. And I said, so what is? What is?
Yes.
And she said, well, I could maybe walk with you. And I said, would it be helpful to walk with someone? Yes. Who would that be? Who's safe? Where could you walk? I said, could we look at, rather than judging yourself for not being at the gym anymore, could we just look at the fact of, like, you walking with your friend a couple times a week? Like, that's where we're at right now. So rather than just striving to, like, this, all those shoulds, right? And I think eating is exactly the same way, is like accepting where the body's at. And so sometimes, like, can I bring you a meal? And sometimes the question of, like, what do you feel like you can eat right now? Right? Like, would soup be appealing, or would, yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of just even asking, just even having the conversation, I think would be so helpful just to normalize the experience. Also, I think it's just asking, like, what can we do to get the body moving? But also, this is like something that I'm also really like pushing for, is just to also be body aware and just recognizing when pushing it to its limits also has its, has its effects as well. And I'll use an example because, similar to your friend that you're helping, like, oh, I'll go to the gym. I was in that same mindset. I wanted, again, back to that normalcy, especially because I've been in health for quite some time. Like, I have a routine. Again, it's that routine that keeps me, stable, and it's what provides structure. After Leo passed, I tried to go back then, like just going through my day to day, pretending like, nothing, bad happened or big happened. I just wanted to continue on. And so I would force myself to the gym. I'd eat, try, just do all the things that I did before. But I just remember sitting up on my bed, and my body was just so hot because it was so inflamed, because it was like, enough. enough. I cannot. You need to rest. And I think that's why I'm encouraging body awareness, is because, I'm just, it's like I'm almost as if I'm smarter than my own body. Like my body doesn't know I'm smarter than my own body. I know what it needs, and that's not the case. I think this is why I've mentioned, I think it's just so beautiful how the body knows. And I think we try to push ourselves in thinking that this is what the body needs, but just being aware that, I need to rest. Like as I mentioned, I've had anxiety and depression all in one day, which, you're going through your day to day with high anxiety. And that's such an energy intensive, where you're hypervigilant, always scanning. And, this is your nervous system is just completely activated through how many hours of a day. And then on top of that, you're trying to go to the gym and you're trying to, do your social events and whatnot. I think it's very hard to slow it down. And I think that's what made me appreciate rest a lot more. So I've mentioned sleep is really important during these phases of grief. Sleep is so important. Trying to eat more of a nutrient dense meals and whatnot, but just slowing down, not having to push yourself to that. And I'm curious if that's what I'm seeing, is that people are trying to push themselves back into normalcy, trying to go back to what it used to be like
Sure
before.
is. Yeah.
And such a natural desire to have things go back to normal,
Yeah.
but maybe the wrong path, because it will never be normal again. And so as we try to recreate the past, we're spending a lot of energy. And we think about that, our identity isn't completely tied into these relationships. And so now who are we? We're trying to figure out who we are at a time when we don't have enough energy to even think straight. But here we are in this place where we're supposed to function as normal. We would like it to be like that. And yet we are in a world that is it changed completely. And we're trying to figure out who we are, maybe as a single person now, or maybe as someone who has lost a close sibling. Who am I in relation if I don't have my brother or my sister? Who am I in relation if I don't have my spouse? Who am I in relation to anything or anyone? And those relationships are things that we build and we love. That's, we make those, you use for attachments. We make those attachments and we want those attachments and we grow them. When someone dies, that's a separation that is unwanted and unwelcomed. And so the body, I can see why we would be trying to go back and recreate that again, so that we can feel safe, so that we can know who we are. We know our day will be like, and yet that will never happen because that person is not here anymore. And therefore our new normal and our future is completely different now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that takes time to figure out, which I wish there was some sort of magic, they say, some sort of way or treatment or intervention that could just make the process so much easier. But I've also thought about this too, because, I was with my partner for 8 years, and I was like, oh yeah, I could go through this grief, no problem, in a year. You try to give yourself a timeline, like, oh yeah, I'll get over, quote unquote, get over this in a year. But I've had this attachment for 8 years. I've thought about this person for 8 years every day, and to just not, just, it's wishful thinking, really. And, it's very, very tough so I think just giving us the gentle, like being gentle with ourselves, understanding ourselves. And I think there's a deeper appreciation. If it weren't for Leo was such a big support system and whatnot, he provided safety. I'm so fortunate to have had such beautiful memories, but coming out of my grief, I just have such a deep appreciation for the body, for life, for all of these attachments now, for cliche as it sounds, for love and these bonds and these attachments, because they mean so much to us, that our body is responding in a way that makes, that provides the safety and the regulation and whatnot. So I think it's important to try to be more body aware, understand what our demands and resources we have, and trying to figure out who we are now with grief. I think just requires a lot of compassion and gentleness. And I've mentioned just like the willingness of, there's like courage in that too, just, trying to figure out yourselves now without this person. And that takes a lot of courage and resilience, as you mentioned, Julie, earlier, which I commend. I commend so wholeheartedly, because it's not an easy path by any means.
Well, certainly one of the things I come away with, Vera, is a deep appreciation for you and your story. And I think the difference is that what you are doing and where you are going and how you are doing this comes out of a deep personal experience and meaning. And that meaning is continually being developed and ongoing. I mean, it's one thing, I have to be careful how I say this, but I mean, I think it would be different if you were trying to talk about this without having experienced it.
Right.
I think your experience adds to both the validity of what you say, but also to the passion of how you are going about this work. And you must realize that there are not a lot of people who are doing what you are doing. And so you're really breaking ground in many ways. But I think what I have appreciated from hearing you today and from watching your YouTubes, and you can talk about that in a second, is that this is truly a heartfelt expression. And so I thank you for that. And I recognize and honor how much that is a part of what drives you at this point.
Thank you so much for that, David. Yes, absolutely. If it weren't for the experiences that I felt, so much pain in that, so much suffering in that, and to go through that without any sort of guidance on how the body, why am I feeling this way, was so painful, especially for somebody who thought I knew about health, thought I knew about the body. And I'm like, wait, no, I don't actually, because this is such a new experience. And I believe that I'm not the only one who's also feeling this way, because I've heard it time and time again, that this is so uncomfortable. Grief is so uncomfortable, which it is. It can be, for sure, because it's trying to learn how to navigate through life again with the pain, with all of these emotions that maybe not many people have felt before. But hopefully the work that I'm doing, and thank you so much, I definitely have seen the gaps, and I'm hoping to be able to share my experience and just my learning through. So hopefully that offers some sort of guidance, some sort of normalcy again with how powerful the body is. And hopefully this will just help somebody go through the grief maybe a little bit easier. So thank you for that, David.
And Vera, on that note, if our listeners want to learn a little bit more about your work or be able to watch your YouTube video, which we all really enjoyed and appreciated prior to speaking with you, can you just kind of give a shout out to where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, I am definitely going on this creative era of mine, which is really fun. It's just my means of expression, and I'm sure other people who have been grieving, as they learn through their own grief journey and about themselves, there's beautiful ways to just share with the world what they've experienced. So I'm on this creative path. So if anybody wants to tune in into all of the learnings and my ways of expression and sharing all of the things that I've learned, feel free to find me on YouTube. I've only got the one video, mind you. But it's just a stepping stone. But it definitely does.
Very good.
It touches base on how grief affects energy. So again, food and nutrition is a big part of how we get the energy, but how that affects sleep, how that affects like our physical health, mental, emotional well-being, and also our life, our identity, our relationships. So how that kind of manifests through grief. So the channel's name is called Life in Full Color. So color being spelled CLR. So again, Life in Full Color. If you want to find me on Instagram, I'm colorful_nutrition. And of course, I had to pick a very difficult name. So color is COLOUR with a U. And then I said full
with 2 L's. So FULL, full as in, full stomach, but full of life. I think I really wanted to add that. So it's also, there's always meaning in everything that I do. So hence full, colorful.
All right. So colorful nutrition.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and your learnings and your creative process with us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is by Sean Heichert and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you found value in our conversations, please support us by following the show, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.